the Ticats Audio Network. This is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
For many years, the West was the best. Has that changed? Now, speaking of change, the Elks are getting a facelift on offense. Will it work? Is Andrew Harris a top 5 running back? And is Kevin Glenn a Hall of Famer? Opinions, facts, and a few laughs are certainly up next. You are listening to the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil. Thank you for checking in to the 3 Down Football podcast that certainly always delivers the top analysts, columnists, and broadcasters from all over the country. Let's introduce our fine fellas that have joined me today. He has the CFL in Southern Ontario covered like a sponge for the Canadian press. Welcome, Dan Ralph.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
He is the voice of the BC Lions out in Sweet Van City, one of the only cities in Canada which I have yet to visit, and I can't wait to get out there and check in with Bob, the Moj Marjanovich.
Well, you know, I kind of find that odd, but then again, when you do have a villa in the south of France that you go to every summer during your holidays, I can understand why you don't get to Vancouver. So, totally understandable, Bubba.
That will be soon, eh? And before I did a little research here. Not that I did know much about this fella here, but before he spent that 7 seasons, 4 as an all-star in the Canadian Football League, he set a school record catching 10 passes for 280 yards at Cornell. What a day that was. From the Ticats Audio Network, we appreciate you, Luke Tasker.
Back in the history of Ivy League football there, that record was broken the next year by a teammate of mine, by the way, unfortunately. But, Bubba, thanks, man. I'm happy to be here.
Hey, guys. I mean, that's 280. That's a big number, guys. Hey, let's get right to our first issue here. Now, through 8 weeks, okay, still got a long way to go in the regular season. The East right now is currently 8-4 versus the West. Has the East taken over as a superior division, Bob?
Well, I mean, right now, if you look at the records, it's tough to argue the fact that the East has the advantage over the West. I mean, you look at Calgary, they're definitely not the team that they've been in the past. Saskatchewan is going through some struggles, obviously, losing Trevor Harris. And speaking of struggles, man, oh man, the Edmonton Elks, what a season they're having. So, I mean, you go by the records. It is what it is. And right now, you have to say that the East is a better division.
Do you buy this, Dan?
Yes and no. Yes, the record says so. No, because 3 of those wins are by Toronto and Ottawa collectively each. So you take those away, they're it skews the record. I mean, heck, we're not even halfway through the year yet. So, I mean, I don't even start looking at stuff until after Labor Day. And it's nice. I think it's been a nice start by the East. But let's see what happens when we get down the stretch and if they can win those games.
Luke, do you buy this? I mean, and Dan is right, as I prefaced earlier, it is early, but the trend for as long as, at least I can remember, over at least the last decade or so, the East is never ahead of the West.
Yeah, it warms my heart to think that's a possibility, that the East could be considered that way. For the years that I spent in Hamilton, in fact, that 4-8 record that you mentioned, I think it's exactly opposite in the last 12 Grey Cups. I may be one off there, but 4 Grey Cups won in the last 10 years or so with by the East, and I'm not ready to say that yet. Toronto is sort of a thing of its own right now. The way that they're playing and the way that they're refusing to lose games. And you've got Winnipeg and BC, both strong teams out there. And in a few weeks from now, if one of these other East teams, Montreal, Hamilton, and Ottawa, can break that 500 and become a winning football team, it might look a little bit different. But to me, Toronto is the East as far as teams that are dominating games, that are winning, expecting to win and making it happen. The West has always had, it's never just been a one-horse show in the West. It's a strong division across, and just like Toronto sort of holding up the East right now and the Elks sort of dragging down the West, I'm not sure I'm ready to call it an East dominant CFL yet.
The amazing thing, Dan, you just broke down some numbers there, and you did, in full due respect to the Toronto Argonauts, but the Ottawa franchise have 3 wins all season, all against West teams.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, you take Toronto and take Ottawa out of the mix, and I think it's a 500 record, right? Or not, it's a below 500 record. So I'm with Luke. I'm not ready to anoint the East being the beast just yet. But I'll tell you, winning those games out West really sets up, when we get down to the stretch, those East versus East games at the end of the year are really going to mean a lot more now, because those Eastern teams are taking care of business out West. So, it's again, I'll start to worry about stuff after Labor Day.
And Dan, this is a good point. This year, to me especially, there's been more interdivision games, meaning East versus East, early in the season. And so, yes, those East versus East later, because there's few of them, they'll be even more heavily weighted. We'll see some good football games. But in these weeks to come, we're going to see more East versus West, West versus East, and this conversation will be made pretty clear, I think, in the coming weeks.
Bob, is this a factor, or the fact that there's really some have and have-nots in the West right now?
Well, to further the point that the guys are talking about, it's one tier, and that one tier has BC, Toronto, and Winnipeg in it. Then you have another tier, and then you have Edmonton, right? So, hate to say it, but that's the way it is. Yeah. But, when you look at the two divisions, right now, Calgary's not the team that they were before. Saskatchewan is going through its struggles. We're seeing what Edmonton is. It's a very top-heavy Western division. So when I look at this right now, and I'm looking at those teams in the East, and you guys are right, East is going to play East, so they're going to feed on one another. So there's going to be some numbers coming out of the East eventually. But, yeah, it's early. But, right now, if I had to pick a division which is stronger, I'd probably go with the East, just on the fact that, again, Calgary, Saskatchewan, Edmonton are falling behind.
Bob, you bring up the name Calgary, and you putting them in that sort of middle ground, bottom feeder ground, which, let's be honest, guys, when's the last time we've actually said that? After Sunday's loss to the Owls, Stampeders quarterback Jake Mayers said the loss was all on me. Now, was he doing the honorable thing, Bob, or was it really all on him?
He's doing the honorable thing. When you look at any game, it's always a team effort. People will look at a specific play and they might point the finger at a certain player. But, man, it's just, there's so much more leading up into that, right? You look at some of the biggest moments in sports history and some of the, quote, GOATs, right? Everybody looks at Bill Buckner as probably one of the biggest GOATs in all of baseball, with that arrow that goes through his legs. They played another game after that. Right? That's the thing about all these crazy things. A lot of times we always focus on this one play that kind of opens the door, but that's the thing about being a championship team, and Luke will attest to this, man. You go through some hard times, you go through some adversity, you got to be able to bounce back, and yeah, you get tested sometimes, but that's the deal. And, with the Calgary Stampeders right now, when you look at their situation, it's not all on Jake Maier. He's got a relatively inexperienced receiving core. I don't think their lines, both on defense and offense, have been as good as they have been in the past. And, they're banged up at running back. So, to me, there's a whole bunch of factors that are contributing to what's going on in Calgary right now.
Well, Bob, you bring up all those factors. And, Luke, you dressed as in black and gold as a Tiger Cat, playing Calgary was sort of a death nail for many years. But that fall off has never really happened for what seems to be close to 2 decades. Are you surprised that it's actually happening now?
Yeah, I guess not surprised. The Bo Levi Mitchell era in Calgary is behind us, and that's sort of the nature of franchises, and they have to go in cycles at some point here. To Jake Mayer's comments and the reality of the Calgary struggles, for the sake of our question, I would say he's doing the honorable thing. It's not the 2 interceptions that you see. I think it was to start the second half, and then at the end of the game, maybe it was that second quarter was the first one, but they were bad throws. You saw him actually, pump to the same side. He doubted himself and then threw the same direction. It's like a classic, interception scenario to second guess on the same receiver. And then, he tried to force it at the end of the game there. So bad decisions, but no, it's not all on a quarterback. And you saw him getting pressured. The Alouettes had some really great stops on defense, and so you can't put it all on yourself or all on one person. And I would even say internally in a quarterback, I can kind of hear, I can almost hear Zach Collaros and Jeremiah Mazzoli, you can say those things to media, and that's fine to do that. I guess you could call that sort of the honorable thing. That's how our question is phrased, and that's fine. But in a sense, I actually think the great quarterbacks, you can't actually internalize that and actually believe it, because you have to actually have sort of the awareness, almost like a coordinator or head coach awareness as a quarterback, to say, yeah, I got to be better. I can't make those interceptions, but we're a team here, and we've got to we've all got to pick it up a little bit. But to take the blame in front of the microphone, fine, no problem. But I've kind of seen quarterbacks, and experienced that where, there is something wrong with being even too hard on yourself too. To take care of your business, but don't wear it so heavy that it's hard to almost come back from, in a sense. And you got to have the swagger and an awareness to continue to battle through the season. Interceptions are going to happen, and you've got to take care of your business, but you've got to expect your team to continue to take care of theirs as well.
I think to further Luke's point, I think, Luke, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this one, but I think when a quarterback takes those bullets for the team, it kind of makes those players around him say, hey, you know what? This guy's taking the heat, even though we have to do a better job. And it kind of, I don't want to say it motivates you, but there's an accountability factor there as a player, and you have to go out there and do a better job because, like I said, you're looking at this guy. He's willing to take a bullet for you, even though you're not doing your job.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry about it. And one more thing on that point. People in Hamilton always talk about Danny McManus being famous for that. Like he could go out and throw 4 touchdowns and they'd lose the game, and he'd put it all on himself. I've heard Coach O say that about Danny. I've heard Hitchcock and all these guys comment on that was just his but you can kind of tell the all-time leading Hamilton Tiger Cat passer, he didn't wear it so heavy, like he just hated himself after each loss, right? He just was a team guy, and he wanted that to be the message, but in reality, he wasn't beating himself up over knowing that he had done his job, and he's able to bounce back from things like that. So there's some sort of balance in there.
Dan, do you expect to bounce back, or is this what we're going to see this year?
Ooh, I'll tell you, I was a little worried about Calgary to start the year. Bo Levi's departure notwithstanding. The 2 guys they lost on defense, Oromalade and Jameer Thurman, to me were 2 huge holes. And if I look at Calgary's defense right now, their inability to get to the passer and their inability to exert pressure are the things that I'm seeing right now. And I'll agree with Bob and Luke. I think Mayer's taking it upon himself and doing the honorable thing. I just hope that as a young guy, to Luke's point, that he doesn't take it and put it internally and put way too much pressure on himself, thinking that he has to try and do it himself. But I was really worried in free agency when they lost those 2 guys on defense, and that's a lot of production that is out east right now.
Let's stay in the province and throw a little audible. And I know we didn't discuss this earlier, guys, but this is an important topic, I believe. Some changes with the Elks and Jarius Jackson being promoted from quarterback coach to offensive coordinator with the Edmonton Elks. And McAdoo sent down, I believe, to be a defensive assistant of some sorts. I guess that's a demotion of sorts, but regardless, there are changes to be made. There apparently could be a change at quarterback as well, too. Bob, you've seen this team probably the most. I don't want to say is there any hope, but can these changes make some type of effect for the Edmonton Elks as a franchise? They're averaging 13 points a game. It's crazy.
Yeah, but this is still a team that's played some competitive football this year. It's not like they've been blown out 59-3, or 47-6 every week. They hung with Winnipeg. It was 6-6 at the half. You look at the game against BC. Even there, their defense played well. And you got to realize, too, when your offense is that inept, how much pressure that puts on your defense. You feel like you got to go out there and make a stop every single time, because if you give up 20, you're going to lose the game. So for me, I think defensively, they're very competitive defensively. I just think offensively, they've got to get something going. Maybe it's changing quarterbacks. Maybe it's getting Trey Ford sometime there eventually. Who knows? Maybe Jarius tweaks it enough that it kind of gives them a fresh start. I don't know. I don't think you can come in the middle of the season and completely revamp an offense. There's no way that's going to happen. But, maybe Jarius just brings a different attitude, maybe tweaks a few things in the playbook, and it allows them to have a little bit more success offensively and be competitive. But, the biggest thing at Edmonton, guys, being there this past weekend, is the fact that they had to do something, and they had to do it because the consumer confidence level there is an all-time low. I was very surprised with the crowd that they did get at the game. We had dinner with former Lions president Rick Lalacheur the night before, and Rick, of course, living in Edmonton with his wife Joan, and Rick wasn't expecting that good of a crowd, and yet when we got there, the crowd was actually pretty decent. So the biggest thing there for me is consumer confidence. You've got to do something to show the fans that you're willing to make a change and trying to fix this.
Luke, I think of yourself actually, and you have to remind me of the year where a change was made at the head coaching.
2017. I know where you're headed with this one. Yeah,
yeah, and I remember, I believe it was an 0-8 record and just a horrible game in Calgary. Yeah. Might even be in the 60s, and June Jones came in, and there was a change, and there seemed to be a change on offense because the offense was struggling. Can this be turned around? Do you see maybe a certain sort of similarity happening there?
Yeah. So that's where I was going to go with this as well. To 2017, we were 0-6. We went to Calgary, and I think we got beat 60-3. It might have been 60-1. I try to forget the whole night there, and then we did a week out west and went to Edmonton and actually came down to the last play of the game, but lost. Actually, Zach threw it to me in the end zone, and we didn't connect, and we lost in Edmonton to go.
What happened, Luke? What happened?
Well, I ran a little Oscar. It was supposed to be an Oscar pump to the right side, and I got covered because I'm not that fast. So, and that did not connect for it. So we lost in Edmonton to go 0-8. That's when June Jones came in. We went on a bye week, and the next game was the Labor Day Classic, and that was our first win of the season with a lightning delay, timely from the Ticats just coming off a lightning delay there. And it did actually. There was some spark, but there was also some strangeness. We were actually running parts of two different offenses in the same game. Ken Austin and June Jones were sort of working together, and we had this sort of pseudo, combined offense and. But there was a little bit of a revitalization there. Now that was an outside hire, so it's going to be different here with an internal hire moving into the coordinator position and the play calling, and we certainly changed some things up personnel wise too. Shortly after that too is when Mazzoli ended up taking over. But it is possible to get a spark with some changes like that. There's also the reality, Bob, you touched on this, just that sometimes. Heads just have to roll just because something's got to change, and you just can't sit around for that long without making a change. And so I don't know what the likelihood of the offense looking differently or substantially different in Edmonton. My last point is this, though, that it is always a little closer. Bobby said 6-6 at half against Winnipeg. The Hamilton, that was the Ticats' best game was at Edmonton, but even at times. Edmonton put the brakes on the Hamilton offense, and they were able to sort of stay in the mix there for a bit. It's just never as far away as it appears. The losing teams aren't as bad. They're not actually 8 losses worse than, say, Toronto or BC. It's just you find a way to win, and it gets contagious, and you can't help, or you find a way to lose, and it gets contagious, and you can't help but lose. And slight changes can turn a little bit. Unfortunately, a Grey Cup. I do think the Lions, Bob, you can correct me. I think it was 0-6 one year is that they came back and won a Grey Cup after an 0-6 start. This is going to take. It'd be one heck of a finishing season for the Elks, with a lot of lucky things happening, and unfortunately, that's probably out of range. But they're going to make changes, and I'm excited. I would be excited to see some production come after those changes are made.
I chuckle when Luke talks about that because our old co-host Chris Burns on our Lions broadcast back in the 1040 days and won a Grey Cup as an O-lineman with those Hamilton Tiger Cats and Danny McManus. Burns, he'd always say, I think it was Ron Lancaster, and I might be misquoting here, but he'd always say, it's not as good as it looks when you win, and it's not as bad as it looks when you lose, right? I mean, there's always that degree, I guess, of being close to where you want to get to. But, yeah, I mean, when you look at the Lions in 2011, the big key with the turnaround there is they did make some personnel changes. Andrew Harris came in for Jamal Robertson at running back. Paris Jackson all of a sudden got bumped out of the lineup. But I think the real key with that team was the fact that everybody was on board with the changes. There wasn't any quote, bitterness. A lot of these guys, they became like mentors to the younger players. The players that got bumped from their starting roles, instead of, going into a fit or sulking, they acted as mentors to some of these younger players. And everybody was pulling on the rope in the same direction. And I think the other thing, too, guys, let's not forget they had Travis Luley at quarterback, which is a big, big part of your team, right? So when they did turn it around, I mean, they went on that heater and, of course, won the Grey Cup at home against Winnipeg. So it is possible, but at the same time, you also need the talent and the culture, the chemistry to get it done.
Last point to you there, Dan. I mean, are the Elks in some type of losing vortex that they can't get out of, or maybe is there going to be a spark?
Good question. I just see a team that's not good enough to overcome its mistakes and picks the wrong time to throw a pick or to get a penalty. I mean, they haven't scored in 2 games against BC, but I seem to recollect that I did see them go in the end zone once and it came back. And I just don't see a team that's good enough to overcome its mistakes and is good enough not to make the costly mistakes. And maybe that's the byproduct of being a young team. And we talked about psyche earlier, and I worry about the psyche of a young team because the longer this goes, it's like, here we go again, right? So, and I mean, I don't know Taylor Cornelius, but he sure looked like a beaten down man to me last week.
It's tough to watch at times.
Yeah.
Andrew Harris, current Argonauts running back, passes Charles Roberts into 5th on the CFL's all-time rushing list. Dan, right to you. Is he in your top 5 of all-time top runners?
He's certainly the top Canadian for obvious reasons. I think he'd probably crack my top 5. He'd be, to me, I've never seen anybody quite as dynamic as Mike Pringle in terms of running the ball. George Reed being George Reed. Those are my top 2. After that, it's open. I didn't get to see some of the other top rushers in league history, but I would put Andrew in my top 5.
You're smiling, Bob. What's going on?
I think Dan and I are probably the same age. Because,
old?
Yeah, we're old because as soon as he mentions George Reed, I remember George Reed just running roughshod over the lines as a kid. You look at some of and I agree totally. For me, it's Reed and Pringle. They're kind of at an elite tier. And Mike Pringle was as you mentioned, such a dynamic running back for all those years in the CFL. So to me, they're up there. And I think Andrew Harris is a top 5 running back. I mean, just the numbers that he's accumulated over the years. He's been a tough runner. We've seen him here in BC firsthand. And it's an amazing story, too, guys, because when Andrew Harris first came to the Lions, Wally Bono played him as a safety. And he was actually a safety with the Lions, practicing. He was playing junior football on Vancouver Island with the Raiders. Then he'd come into Vancouver, practice with the Lions. And then they actually moved him to slot back the following year. And then they finally determined, you know what, let's give him a shot at running back and see how he does. And the rest, as they say, is history. But, it's a little, it's a tribute to Andrew in terms of perseverance because I've seen a lot of guys. Hell, I played with a guy who was in junior football with the Richmond Raiders prior to UBC, my UBC days. There was a guy we had named Gary Handley who was the most outstanding junior player in Canada. He was an unbelievable linebacker. Don Matthews decides to make him into a defensive end when he goes to Lions training camp, and he was done. I mean, he just couldn't handle the position switch. But, it's props to Andrew Harris for doing what he's done. The fact that he started off as a safety, moved to a slot, and never gave up the dream that he could be an elite running back.
Luke, I just brought up some big numbers in your college career, and I think Bob brings it up. I did did play-by-play for a Canadian championship in Burlington many moons ago, and Andrew Harris was the feature running back, and I swear, I'm not joking, he ran very close to 500 yards in that game. I mean, it was unbelievable. I believe in my head it was 482, and they won the Canadian Junior National Championship. But yet it's funny, and maybe Bob, because of his point there of where he wasn't supposed to be a running back, I feel like Andrew Harris has kind of had a chip on his shoulder for most of his career. A little bit like, I need to prove myself. I need to prove it to all you guys. When you played against him, obviously you're both offensive players, did you feel that with him as well?
I did. I mean, the thing that stands out to me is I remember some big sort of confrontations with Simone Lawrence and Andrew Harris and being part of that. And he did have a chip on his shoulder. I think that's accurate description. And certainly in my mind, Andrew Harris is very near the top. And the thing that stands out to me, if you look at the top 10 for the CFL rushers, only one other person has rushed after 2010. And he's still doing it in 2023. And that, I just see on Sports Center yesterday, they're rolling this thing of the decline of the running back in football, right? And everything NFL, see, it's a passing sport now, and he's making impacts, beyond what some of these great running backs have in yardage. I think it's worth mentioning. Of course, it's a team sport, and not all. It's not fair to totally weigh this, but he's a 4-time Grey Cup champion, and he was the MVP in one of them as a Canadian running back. So yeah, I think he belongs right up there, I think he certainly does. Certainly a Hall of Famer. Certainly he was 2-time Canadian player in the Grey Cup. I mean, it was sort of an awesome part of this last decade of the CFL.
Dan, even to this point, he's still got a little versatility. I mean, he can still catch the ball coming out of the backfield very effectively.
Yeah, and he's a nice 1-2 punch with A.J. Ouellette. And, I mean, the thing that has impressed me the most after last year was he could have retired and gone off into the sunset very easily. He's coming back. He knew he was coming back to a lesser role, and I think he's taken it upon himself to mentor A.J. a bit and to provide that leadership, to provide that mentorship. And that hasn't been lost on me, because this guy's been the top dog for a long time, and I think it takes a special person to take a step back and understand that this is your last year, probably, and that you're not going to be the feature guy anymore, but you're still going to play a role. Kudos to him.
Kudos to, and let's be honest, Bob, he's had some serious injuries too, and I think it was a torn pec as well too was one of them, which a lot of guys don't come back from, and he's continued to play a physical style of running the football.
And the other thing too that I think comes into play, fellas, you look at this Toronto team, and we all look at how well the Argos are playing now, coming off a Grey Cup win. Remember, this is a team that came into Vancouver at the start of last year and absolutely got drilled. I mean, I can't remember the score off the top of my head, but they got throttled by Nathan Rourke and the Lions. And somehow, some way, they managed to turn that around. And obviously, Andrew Harris was part of that leadership group that did turn it around for him. So I think, you can touch on what he does on the field for that organization, but at the same time, I think he's a valuable component of the leadership core with the Argos. And like I said, everyone just kind of raves about how well the Argos are playing. I remember they came into Vancouver and they just got hammered. And then at the end of the year, they're Grey Cup champs, right? Which tells you that, they just kind of had to take a good hard look in the mirror and kind of change their approach. And, we always talk about attention to detail and the little things, but just really dedicate themselves to their craft. And we saw what happened. I mean, they were Grey Cup champions.
All right, guys, this is going to be, I have asked no less than 10 people this question, and I cannot believe the diversity of answers I have gotten. I'll throw you some stats here. 53,000 yards passing, a completion percentage of 63.2, 293 touchdown passes, 207 interceptions, and a starting record of 103 wins, 104 losses, and 1 tie. Luke Tasker, is Kevin Glenn, a quarterback, a Hall of Famer?
So my first answer is going to say yes, right off the bat, and then I'm going to caveat this, but he's played on, I think he's the only player who has been a part of every single CFL team. So in one way, the guy he's a all-Canadian athlete. He's just a guy that Canada knows and loves. 18 seasons, I think, or however, the majority of 2 different decades playing, and not just bouncing around, not a long snapper bouncing around all these teams. He those stats, he's right up at the top of the list for yards, completions. Same thing I said about Andrew Harris, though. Andrew Harris is a 4-time Grey Cup champ, and KG never got a Grey Cup, which is mind-blowing. It's hard to imagine, and you can kind of see that being a part of all those CFL teams. I think it's interesting. It's exciting. It's they should write a novel about his time in the CFL and all the players and stories and things that he must have, and for what a great guy he is. But then you could also take the flip side is somebody like Ricky Ray, who 2 long stays at 2 franchises and difference maker in the league for all those years, didn't bounce around the same and did win Grey Cups. And so it's hard. I just think for the years he played, for the yards that he threw, and for the Canadian journey he took, I would love to see a guy like KG in the Hall of Fame.
Dan, I keep hearing there's good, very good, and then there's Hall of Fame. Where does he fit for you? Very good.
I would wrestle with it. I would not. I mean, I look at his record, 103, 104, and 1, and that sort of stops me a little bit. Now, maybe it's to Luke's point, the fact that he did go to a lot of teams, and not every team was a championship caliber team. And I think Kevin was a very, very, very effective player. I remember in 07, a shoulder injury is all that stood between him going to a Grey Cup with Winnipeg, and he lost. He was injured here in Toronto in the East Final. And I
introduced Ryan Didwinny.
and I believe Kev was also the quarterback of record in 214 or 212 here in Toronto as well. A very good quarterback, and you know what? I can't begrudge him his longevity and his numbers, but two things stand in my way of saying that you go from very good to the top tier, and that's your one-loss record and your Grey Cup record. And to me, the Hall of Fame is the Hall of Fame of the best, not the very good.
Bob, it's so true. Sometimes it's the eye test, and sometimes it's the stat test. Where does it fit for you?
Well, fellas, I'm going to ask you this, and Dan and Bubba and Luke, you guys can answer this as I throw it out there. But to me, it boils down to one question. We had this great debate when Patrick Marleau passed Gordie Howe for most games played in the National Hockey League. Is longevity a skill? Right? I mean, do you view longevity as a skill? Because to me, that's what this question's about. It's not about Kevin Glenn being a dominant performer. Ray Ferraro always had a great quote when he talked about Hall of Fame. Did you have to game plan against this guy? And maybe a little different, obviously talking hockey than football. I mean, you always game plan against a quarterback. But when I look at Kevin Glenn, he was an all-star once. He led the CFL in passing once, right? So, and he didn't win a Grey Cup. So then it boils down to me, is longevity a skill, and is it worthy enough to get you into the Hall of Fame? And unfortunately for me, it's not. Yeah, outstanding career, but when it's all said and done, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer.
Luke, we do that, and especially in the NFL. They really look at championships as quarterbacks, as for greatness. And it's hard to argue the fact that it's shocking. It's hard to believe that in a 9-team league, and the fact that he has played for at least he's dressed for all, or at least he's been on at least a contract with all teams, but I think he's only played for 7. Mm-hmm. But the fact that he's never gotten to the top of the mountaintop is incredible to me.
Yeah, it's hard. And I after a 7-year career, I couldn't believe that I didn't win a Grey Cup after having 3 chances at it. So after that many seasons, it's almost heartbreaking, you could say. I think one thing that KG has, and I never played with him, we missed each other by 2 years in Hamilton. One thing that he has, though, is a very, very clear for teams want him in the locker room. He has a Hank Burris-ness to him of just like being a great guy to be a teammate with. And I think that added to his longevity as well, where maybe you could argue with a guy of similar statistics or similar winning percentage and ability. A lot of those guys would have found their way out of the league much earlier, but KG is a guy who's just good for teams. And so, yeah, that maybe that doesn't, in a lot of people's eyes, lead to a Hall of Fame, and maybe rightly so. But his journey and his time spent and is still interesting enough to me to be a very memorable CFLer.
Counterpoint to you, Dan, in the sense of you talk about win-loss record, and I think all 4 of us would agree that football is the ultimate team game. So should we weigh that win-loss record?
Probably not, but we do. And I mean, the same thing as we say, well, he didn't win a Grey Cup. It's a team game. I'll get you that, but if I'm a defensive coordinator, I coordinate my defense with Kevin. I do. But do I coordinate it the same way I do if I'm coordinating against Bo Levi in his prime, or Ricky Ray, or any of the other top quarterbacks? And I love Kevin. I do. When he played, he was one of my favorite people.
One of the good guys in the league.
Oh man, I mean, when he sucked, he told you he sucked. When he did well, he told he took a bullet for you, but he also spread the accolades around. But I just, it's the Hall of Fame, not the Hall of the Very Good. If it was the Hall of the Very Good, he'd be a first ballot. There's also
it's same thing with our Jake Mayer conversation earlier in this podcast, is that you have to balance two things of quarterback being the most difficult, most on a platform position in sports, balanced with football being the best team sport that's ever been. So there's two things at play here where quarterbacks, they can win and lose games. Their play is in a spotlight. They're the most important guy. And it requires the 11 other guys out there with the quarterback to be performing. So, I mean, that's the best thing about football is that right there, the balance of individual performance and team effort. And yeah, it's pretty shocking, honestly, with that to play that many years and to unfortunately come up short on Grey Cups.
Bob, your question, I think, is outstanding. And I think it probably does go for all sports. And Marlowe is just a perfect example in comparison to a Kevin Glenn. Because you cannot argue with the longevity and the fact that, as Dan pointed out, people wanted him even late in his career. So, yeah, maybe there is something to be said about length of career and the fact that, I mean, Luke, you played the game most recently. Like, it's tough. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. If you didn't have an injury, you might still be playing.
It's unbelievably tough. You said Andrew Harris coming back from the torn pec. My last season, 2019, you could close your eyes and point at me somewhere, and I probably had an injury there, and that really did lead to it. Of course, COVID, that threw a little curveball at everyone's career decisions at that time in the CFL. But to come back that many times after endless injuries, that was an important part of Kevin Glenn's story too.
Crazy, Bob. Like, again, to your point there, and that, as I said, that was a great example there of actually talking about longevity, because that will be an argument and a debate that goes on.
And here's the other thing too: is if Kevin Glenn has 3 Grey Cups to his credit, this is a no-brainer. He's a Hall of Famer, right? But It's like Dan says, even though it's a team sport and you try not to skew your opinion to team results, it weighs so much. I mean, look at Peyton Manning in the National Football League. He wasn't considered one of the elite quarterbacks until he won a Super Bowl. I mean, you look at another guy like Dan Marino and the numbers that he put up, right? And I'll say this in reference to, Luke's dad's team, the Buffalo Bills. I mean, Jim Kelly never won a Super Bowl, but the fact that he got the 4 of them, man, that tells you something about the resilience that they had. And I think that probably, in that instance, doesn't weigh as much not winning it, but the fact that they did get to 4 So I think that's the other thing, too, is somehow, some way, when you look at these quarterbacks, it always kind of boils down to team performance. Yeah, it's the ultimate team game, yet at the same time, the quarterback has so much impact on that team game as well.
As we close this conversation out, and Luke knows I go way back with those Bills teams that you just talked about, Bob, and Luke, your dad's got to get in the Hall of Fame, for crying out loud. What the heck is going on? Like, I mean, it's ridiculous.
You can see why I maybe err on the more liberal entry into the Hall of Fame in this conversation. I think he should too. He's in the final cut, but now he's 25 years out there. That's a legacy, induction. So no one's ever said to me that he shouldn't. Everyone I see walking on the street says in Buffalo there's a bunch of believers here, but I think there's some people. The biggest thing in my dad is just special teams, and does a difference maker on special teams belong there. But to all of our point here in this, one thing certainly true of Steve Tasker is you had to game plan against him. You actually had to talk about him in every meeting going into the game playing the Buffalo Bills, and special teams was played differently in the NFL after his career than it was before his career because of the way he changed things. So Oh yeah, the conversation's out there, Bubba. I'll make sure people know what we think here.
I'm with you on that one. And for me, another example is a good friend of ours, Lorenzo Neal, who I consider the best fullback in the history of the National Football League. I think he blocked for 7 or 8 1,000-yard rushers. And, you look at certain positions, and whether it's a punter, whether it's a field goal kicker, special teams guy, fullback, you could be the very best at what you do, and for Hall of Fame voters, it's not good enough because you didn't make that much of an impact. Well, the Hall of Fame is supposed to be for the best players. And if you're the best fullback of all time or the best special teams player of all time, why aren't you in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, it makes no sense. Yeah, I mean, again, what your dad did, downfield tackling ability at his size, unbelievable. Never seen better, for crying out loud. And then halfway through his career, turned into a real good receiver as well too.
That is a really unique part of it. He actually started at receiver for the first time as like a 34-year-old or something like that. And for Jim Kelly, and he always says when he started his career, when he was covering punts, he was covered by like the backup free safety. To start, and at the end of his time covering kicks, he had both starting corners double covering him to cover kick on special teams, and things just got different. And he was that dominant out there. So yeah, we still push for it, Bubba. Dad's not holding his breath, I can tell you that much. And he's got the One Bills Live and a good life here in Buffalo, and doesn't miss an opportunity on the golf course either. So he's not holding his breath or in need of much here.
Well, I just know if you ever talk to Marv Levy about Steve Tasker,
oh yeah,
be prepared for an hour-long conversation.
You're right. Marv Marv. We had him on the Ticats Audio Network last year when he went into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame for his time in Montreal. He's an unbelievable guy, and still to this day writes letters to the Hall of Fame about my dad, writes letters to the Bills. He's an unbelievable advocate for a lot of the guys that he coached in the 90s.
That's what you get for going to Harvard, for crying out loud. Hey, guys, great bunch of games coming up this week. I kind of know, we had some really, really back-to-back real good weeks, and I thought last week might have dipped a little bit, but holy mackerel, I think it gets great again this week. All right, game of the week, Dan Ralph. BC at Winnipeg, Toronto at Calgary, Montreal at Hamilton, Ottawa at Saskatchewan. Your game of the week is?
BC Winnipeg. Just for to me, can BC duplicate what it did back in at IG Field earlier in the summer? Or does Winnipeg sort of atone for that? That to me, that's for first place in the West. It's an opportunity for Winnipeg to create the tie. It's the opportunity for the Lions to create some more separation. And I'll tell you, that's my game of the week, hands down.
Bob, I watched that game twice. I thought it was so good. And actually what happened at IG Field and the defensive masterminding that went on in that game and execution, obviously, was unreal. Can it happen again, Bob?
Well, the way the Lions defense is playing right now, I mean, they're absolutely lights out. Can it be 30-6 again? I doubt it. I think this is going to be a real focused Winnipeg team that's going to be looking for a little payback. I think it's going to be a hell of a football game. I'm really looking forward to calling it. But the way the Lions defense is playing right now, man, they're just it's just at another level, fellas. And the really cool thing about that Lions defense, I mean, Matthew Betts is probably the guy that gets the most pub with his 10 sacks, but it's contributions across the board. I mean, you look at the defensive line, they're too deep in the rotation. Everybody in that secondary is contributing. All the linebackers are contributing. I mean, I think Bo Lacumbo might be their leading tackler, I know that. But it's a total team effort, and it's just a lot of fun to watch.
Luke, before we get to your game of the week, let's just say this about this game, this BC Winnipeg game, because you played with him. Zach Claris is a very proud man, and he got beat up pretty good in that first encounter. You got to believe he's going to be coming back, and the head coach as well too at Winnipeg. I'm sure this is going to be something else, and revenge. I don't know how much it plays, but I'm sure it's on their mind. Yeah,
I think so. And Winnipeg and Mike O'Shea's Winnipeg and this these years of that franchise, they are physical. They really do play physical, and when they get beat up, I would expect a real battle, and that is the game to watch this week. I will say that we talked earlier about the East versus West and what's the dominating side of this CFL this year. Well, Montreal and Hamilton, one of those teams needs to pull ahead, and so that's going to be a really big game too. And the game the previous encounter with those two teams, also at Tim Hortons Field, that was Hamilton's maybe their ugliest game. It was maybe the dark point of their early first 6 games, and so Hamilton has a lot to prove against Montreal, and the East needs to start taking shape into tracking down Toronto. So I'm excited for Hamilton against Montreal. But boy, the battle in the West is a great matchup, and that's sure to make for a great weekend.
All the games I'm looking at, fellas, to me, Toronto-Calgary is the one where I kind of go, well, probably Argonauts by 17 or something. But
really?
I mean, I look at the other games. I think they're going to be very competitive. When I look at Montreal and Hamilton, I think that's going to be a great game to watch. Even Ottawa and Saskatchewan, I think is going to be a pretty good game to watch, entertainment-wise, in terms of two teams that are kind of even. But I just look at Toronto and Calgary. Man, the way Toronto's rolling right now, and yeah, I know it's on the road, but maybe Dan can attest to this a little bit more, but I just think that it's good. I think that's the game where you kind of like, okay, I think this might be over by the third quarter.
And Dan, it's for all those reasons that I'm really curious about. I mean, going to Calgary has never been easy for Toronto. It never is for any team in the East. And I know we've talked about some of the issues with the Stamps, but you know what? I don't think anyone's going undefeated this year. And at some point, there's going to be that, I don't want to say trap game, but the game where the intensity might not be there. Do you see that possibly happening?
Oh, I think it's possible. But again, I just looked at a Toronto offense that is very, very careful with the ball, and you got to play top-notch defense against them, because if you let them, they'll run the ball on you, and if you let them, Chad Kelly is capable of throwing for 300-plus yards, and so to me, you pick your poison. And like I said, I have real concerns. I had real concerns at the beginning of the season with Calgary's defense based on what they had lost. And you know what? If they're waiting for Toronto to beat itself on offense, good luck with that.
You know, Luke, to your point, what's going on in Montreal and Hamilton, it looks like, obviously, Bo Levi Mitchell, we know about the injury there. He's back on the 6th game. By all accounts, Matthew Schultz not available. Taylor Powell, the Taylor Powell experience. What are you expecting?
Well, in his start, in his one start that he's had this year, I actually was impressed. I like him. He's mobile, and he's one of those guys, you know, who can keep his eyes downfield when he's on the move really well. Zach Collaros, I think, is the best I've ever seen at that, out of the pocket, still seeing an entire field of defense. I see a little bit of that in Taylor Powell. His interceptions were bad decisions. So, you know, they weren't even 50-50 balls or great play defensively. They were bad throws, which is kind of expected. You know, of course, Bo Levi Mitchell is coming off of a 5-interception game too. It's been an ongoing issue for the Ticats, no matter who's back there. But I am truly, if you started out any season, you said which team has the best chance with their third string quarterback. Well, you know, I'm actually excited. Taylor Powell, I believe that he could win games, and we'll see if maybe those decisions can get a little bit tighter and some of the mistakes he made 2 weeks ago.
You know, Bob, the Ticats kind of put maybe at least a damper into the crumback, and I don't know. I still don't know. Is Mason Fine any good?
Well, I think Fine is going through the process of just getting up to game speed, as is Crum. Though the one thing, getting back to Crum, fellas, that I really looked at, and my co-host, or pardon me, my color analyst, Julio Caravetta, said, I think, you know, right now he's just running to run. And I know, Luke, you could probably understand this, and Dan, the same thing. It's like, as a quarterback, the good quarterbacks run to throw, right? And right now with Crum, I think he's just running to run. Once he learns to run to throw, I think he's going to be a way, way more effective quarterback. And that's going to come with hopefully experience and hopefully game reps, right? And same thing with a guy like Mason Fine. I mean, Mason Fine, the game that Trevor Harris got hurt, came in and basically had 2 touchdown drives. Now, one of them, of course, was that fluke catch that went off Moxie on that Hail Mary. But at the same time, I mean, it's about just getting that experience and getting those repetitions in games and going from there. Now, does that mean you're going to be good eventually? I mean, Taylor Cornelius is what, 4-23 as a starter. He's had plenty of reps. But, you know, you have to give these kids an opportunity and see what they can do.
Dan, last one to you there on that particular game about Ottawa, and have they come back down to earth with Dustin Crum?
Well, I mean, it's funny. we're talking about if they've come down to earth. Well, two things last week that caught my eye is if Brandon Dandridge doesn't fumble, Hamilton doesn't score, and I think in my mind, Ottawa wins that game. And secondly, even with Stale's deflection of that pass, if somehow Crum gets that ball past Casey, Bahar was wide open for the touchdown. And so, I mean, the margin of error for that team is just like that. And I mean, we could be talking about him being 3-1. Heck, we could be talking about him being 4-0. Because the first time he played Hamilton, he finished 1.5 yards short of the end zone. That would have been in a position to at least force overtime. And who knows what this kid does in the extra session. But I think, to your point, I'm seeing a quarterback who's running, maybe because he's not quite up to speed yet on reading a defense and knowing what's there for him, and that if he does move laterally or sideways, that he doesn't quite know where to look just yet. But you know what? If I'm Bob Dice, I hold my breath because he's already my fourth quarterback this year, and if he gets hurt, what happens?
Well, Rick Castada was in the stands the other game, so maybe they can lure him out of retirement.
Oh my gosh, there's a name.
You know, Luke, he does have a point. Obviously, you calling that game, I mean, the margin of victory for the Tiger Cats, because probably of the turnovers, that game could have been a blowout without the turnovers, but they were. The turnovers did happen.
Yeah, realistically, that should have been 5-1, the turnover ratio, right? It was 5-3 because you have a double turnover play where Terry Godwin comes back and strips it from Dandridge. I mean, that's an unbelievable. That's sort of an anomaly of a football game, right? And that would have been Ottawa ball
35.
35. They were already in score. They were already well within field goal range. And then the end of the game, I mean, I would credit the Ticat defense for that stop. But twice against Ottawa, those games end at the 2 or 1 yard line. So yeah, this could very easily look differently in the East, and the turnovers. I mean, I don't know if it's ever been done that a team has won with a -4 turnover ratio, or how frequently it's been done. But that could have easily been the story with Ottawa and Hamilton had those few fluky plays gone differently. So,
do you know what I find amazing, fellas? It's just our perception of the body of work changes on maybe 1 or 2 plays, right? I mean, if Crum runs into the end zone, it's another Crum back. How outstanding is this kid? This, and that. I mean, Jake Mayer makes that throw in the end zone, and they beat Montreal, or go out on overtime and beat Montreal. All of a sudden, it's amazing how one play can change your entire perception of that entire body of work. And I think sometimes you gotta kind of step back a little bit, look at the body of work, and try to take the one play out of it and then try to make that judgment. But so many times we're so focused on that one play to basically define that body of work for us.
You're so right. And it's just like Edmonton. You take Edmonton, compare them to BC, Winnipeg, or Toronto. They're not actually, what is it, 6+8, what is it, 14 wins different sort of net spread, right? They're not actually that much worse of a football team, but they've got these isolated problems that they cannot overcome. And all of a sudden, almost halfway through the season, they're nearly out of reach from even being in contention. It's the nature of sports, I suppose. And I think the same thing, Bob, in our broadcasts. You know, you look at a quarterback's performance and take out the interceptions he throws, and you know he may look like he's on track to be an MOP. But those 3 plays added back in, and he had a bad game.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff, guys. Hey, fantastic opinions, expertise, as always, from you three. We really appreciate it here at the CFL this week. As always, of course, because so many people like to talk 3-down football, especially through social media. Bob, if people do want to contact you, where are they going to find you?
Okay, before we talk about social media handles like @TheRealMoj on Twitter and Instagram, I'm really disappointed in you because you told me I could take a run at McMahon Stadium next time I was on, because we're talking about stadiums and horrible stadiums in the league. So just because of the fact you didn't allow me to take a run at McMahon, I'm just going to do it myself. All right? I'm telling you, McMahon Stadium is the worst stadium in the league, and I'm going to show you a photo. As Dan knows, in the press box, there's like this area between the press box and where the TV booths and all there, and there's a coffee machine there, right? I don't know if you guys can pick this up on the camera. It's too bright, actually. But there was a sign on the coffee machine: pour water in only, waiting on parts. It's a coffee machine, not a Ferrari. It's the cheapest, most butt-ugliest stadium in the league. Okay, I'm going off on McMahon because you didn't allow me. You said you're going to allow me to do it. I'm doing it right now. I'm just telling you guys, I don't care what anyone says. I'll take Montreal over McMahon any day of the week. Any day of the week. And the hot dogs in Montreal are fabulous as well, as you guys would attest to. But so there you go. That's my rant. I'm done. At The Real Mojo on Twitter and on Instagram. There you go.
I don't know where I go with this. Dan, where do we find you?
Nowhere.
If you want to talk about the experience at McMahon Stadium, anything you got to talk about there. Maybe that's something for you to write about next.
At Dan Ralph CP, but no, I can't top that.
Luke, where do you get to contact you?
No social media for me. I'm a freewheeler. I'm an agent in the dark. But seriously, you can email gameday@ticats.ca and for accessing us through the Ticats audio network and the Coach O Show with Luke Tasker. You can I'd encourage everyone you can write in questions to ask Coach O on that weekly podcast, and it's been pretty great. And Coach is very free with info. He's open and free with information. So ask whatever you think you'd like to hear from Orlando Steinauer. That's gameday@ticats.ca.
Yeah, he's really open and free with information for you, not me.
Not me.
Not for Dan, any of us for crying. You're the only one that's got the secret key.
Our show's kind of the fireside chat with Orlando Steiner. You know, it's very he's great. I mean, he's really good. And this is an interesting one this week that we did after Bo Levi Mitchell got injured, of course, in the last plays of the Ottawa game. And yeah, no, Coach has been gracious, and it's actually a very entertaining and fun podcast with him.
All those years as a player of me sticking a microphone in front of his face, always a smile on his face. Now, these days, I get the evil eye.
Well, you know, Bubba, you and I are on the round table at the end of most of the Ticat games for the post-game show, and nothing like a post-game interview after a loss. There's really not really a great question to ask in most cases, but we do our best.
Especially when you're the first one asking the question.
Yes.
Guys, again, thank you so much for joining us. Hey, folks, we hope you enjoyed that 60-minute chat of CFL football. We do it better than anyone else, no doubt, because we have the best people joining me to talk about the CFL and what's coming up, what's controversial, what's not. And obviously, if we want to talk about McMahon Stadium, you know where to find Bob Marjanovich. One more time, I'll leave it at that. Hey, folks, this has been the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network.